We're here from Bringing Up Book Lovers. Today, homeschooling veteran and author Phyllis Wheeler
and currently homeschooling parent Sarah Bogle are here to talk to you about Ragweed and Poppy by Avi. You may know, I'm sure you know Avi, but this is a book in a series about this character named Ragweed, who is a mouse. So Phyllis, do you mind giving a little summary of the book?
Sure. So Ragweed is one of these characters in the long tradition of the rambling man. He's just out rambling around for adventure or whatever comes up, So he starts having, in this book, some adventures related to a baby raccoon and his mother. And so the raccoon is somehow got up into this freight car where Ragweed is heading out from wherever he was before. And so Ragweed decides, well, I do have to help him. So he helps him. And then Ragweed finds himself in the same forest where the little raccoon lives pretty soon. And he hears a little cry for help. And he discovers a mouse stuck in a trap. Well, he's a rambling man, but he doesn't really have anything pressing to do, so he decides to help the mouse. So this story, this whole book really is about what happens next, like how's he going to help the little mouse in the trap? And what are the developments after that? There's a whole bunch of endearing characters. This Avi is very good at pulling your heartstrings with these little critters. He's good at
it. So what were some of the themes that came through in the book?
Well, being willing to stop and help someone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what do you call that? Altruism or,
Good Samaritanism.
Good Samaritanism. And well, being brave, he ends up doing things that really kind of make him pretty scared, like crossing a brook, which for a mouse is, like a bridge, what are you going to do? So, and there's a snake.
Mm-hmm.
So he manages not to totally freak out with the snake. And you know what? He actually helps the snake. Yeah, he does. The snake's trying to shed his skin. And Ragweed gives him a hand. Okay, themes, right? Yeah, so bravery is a theme, and yeah, and there's a bunch of, so Poppy comes from a clan of mice who live in this tumbled down old house, and they, except for Poppy, are afraid to leave it. So Ragweed goes over there and asks them to send some people over to help get Poppy out. And they're all just like trembling in their boots about even leaving their house, much less crossing the brook and crossing the meadow. And oh, there might be snakes. And well, it turns out there are a few of them that have enough courage to do it. But it's really quite a high contrast between these little fraidy mice mm-hmm. and the necessary pluck that is needed for this task of springing Poppy out of the trap.
Character development for the little animals?
Well, Ragweed definitely goes through a character arc here because he goes from being a rambling man with his face set outward, moving on to somebody who wants to maybe stick around a little bit, hang out on this with Poppy's clan a little bit, you know.
Mhm.
So that's something.
Yeah. I haven't read any of the previous Ragweed and Ragweed books, although my daughter read the original Ragweed book and she really liked it. So there were some, you know, missing pieces for me. Like he wears an earring and I was wondering where the earring came from, which was
Yeah,
just
that's not explained. Why is there a
yeah.
knife on it here?
Um,
Yeah.
so it'd be interesting to, you know, think about his character throughout the whole series at some point after we finish reading them. So yeah, and I thought one of the other things that I liked about his character and the development of his character was him as a leader. When he was trying to assemble that little group of mice to go help Poppy. Um, I mean, he wasn't like, you know, a general or anything, but he was in charge and he was trying to mobilize these guys and in some ways inspire a little bit and encourage them. So I thought that was kind of a cool
Good point.
little, yeah,
Yeah.
part. How about any memorable scenes or which were the most memorable scenes?
Well, there's a couple that are actually pretty funny. So he's got this little troop of, you know, like 8 or 9 mice who are going to go rescue Poppy. And mostly they're not the bold type. They're just little guys, but they love Poppy and they want to help. So uh, so that you remember I told you this snake had shed his skin with the help of ragweed, and so ragweed knows where the skin is, so he fetches it and um, he dresses up these. He chews a hole in the bottom of it, and he asks the little parade of mice to carry the snake skin over their heads. It sort of looks kind of like a Chinese dragon in a festival parade, you know. It's pretty funny. And then there's another scene where so in this tumble down old house, there's some people coming through. They're interested in buying it, maybe fixing it up. And at one point, one of them opens a closet door, and there's like 45 mice staring up at them. Yeah, it's funny. So there's some funny scenes here.
Yeah. The snakeskin one was definitely in my mind the most memorable as well. I think there's a picture of it too. There's a few
Yeah,
illustrations.
it's illustrated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but even without the illustration, it was just a funny passage there. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
What do you think about capturing what it feels like to be the main character?
Yeah, definitely. We definitely feel what he's feeling, which is just a wide mixture of emotions as the story goes by. But you know, just wanting to see the world, see what's going on, being irritated by this little raccoon that has needs, you know, and like, oh, all right, I'll help you. And so it's a good thing he did because that is one of the keys to solving the huge problem at the end of the book. So,
Yeah.
mhm. Yep.
He definitely has an interesting personality. I wouldn't have thought about the term the rambling man, but since you said it, I was like, yeah, he really is. He definitely has that little bit carefree and, you know, hard to tie down kind of guy. Even his speech is sounds, you know, carefree. It's fun to read. So I'm looking forward to reading it out loud to my kids after we finish the book we're currently on. Um, about overall likes and dislikes.
I can't think of any dislikes.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah. There is that one unanswered question. Why does he have an earring for people like us who haven't read the other books?
Yeah, he's definitely symbolic. Yeah, there was one scene where I think when he was captured, maybe it was a human, I think, that saw him, and they're like, "What is that in his ear? I think it's an earring. Why does he have an earring?" It was funny too. Um, all right, last question. Anything potentially controversial for homeschoolers in this book?
Nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just a really good little animal tale
yeah,
of altruism and taking care of others, and even when you don't want to.
yeah. Is that what you think? Because when I asked you via text earlier, how you like the book, and you said it was not a typical mouse tale. It's not the usual anthropomorphized animal story. Is that what you meant by like the themes of it? Maybe you don't remember me asking.
Yeah, no, I do remember that now. It just doesn't. He seems he seems very real to me, but he seems to be a mouse. I mean, he's got mouse thoughts.
Hmm.
He doesn't have human thoughts. A lot of these, well, stories, especially for young children, they'll have a mouse or other animals that, well, they're basically really humans,
Yeah.
wearing animal clothing or something. So, but these, he's got mouse-ish thoughts, but it's so funny, that little raccoon. You see into the thoughts of the little raccoon once in a while, and he is, well, he acts like he's like, in terms of a child, a human child, maybe just barely able to talk, or maybe a little bit more than that, but he certainly has zero understanding of the world. And he keeps wandering away from his mother and then coming to grief and wondering what's wrong. Where's mom? And where's Ragweed? Yeah, it's delightful the way the author got into the head of that little raccoon.
Yeah, he was a funny character, and he was right there, really close to the beginning too. So it was
Yeah,
fun to read about him from the start.
yeah, yeah.
Well, we're gonna talk to Avi, like the famous Avi, the real one, in just a minute. So stick with us.
Yeah.
And where are you located?
St. Louis,
St. Louis. Okay.
and you are in,
Way up in the Rocky Mountains, about
oh,
9,000 feet up, in the middle of a forest. And
oh, nice.
well, it's very smoky around here because we have a forest
Oh,
fire, about 15 miles away. And we live in a forest, so that's always problematical.
oh, wow. Well, so we need to ask you some questions here. So, first of all, our big question about this book is, where did the earring come from? Because neither one of us has read your other Poppy book, Ragweed books.
Well, there is a sequence of 7 books, and it starts off with the title called Ragweed. And it concerns a mouse who leaves his home and goes to a city, and he becomes engaged with a whole group of city mice. And when he leaves, they give him a gift of an earring. And that earring pops up in every one of the books. And at the last book, which is called Poppy and Aerith, it also plays a particularly significant role in terms of what happens in the whole story. But the 7 books are interconnected. You can read them alone individually, but I think it's much more fun if you read them sequentially.
Mhm.
And any number of teachers read, so I'm told, they spend a year reading all 7 books. So, which sounds fun to me.
So where does this one fall? It's obviously not the last book.
So that's the books were not written in sequence.
Right. Yeah.
Are, and that is the second in the
Second.
sequential saga.
Mhm.
So first he goes to the city, and then in this one he goes to the country.
Well, he leaves the small city and goes into the country, and that's where he meets the other mouse named Poppy, and that continues on. And then the third book is Poppy, and so forth and so on. It just continues on.
Yeah, so Poppy has an interesting personality. She,
In what way?
well, she ventured far away from that house that she and her clan were living in. Everybody else is afraid to go outside, but she, you know, just likes to dance or something, and she ends up
Right,
dancing into a trap.
right, right, right. Well, that's what happens, and that's where Ragweed meets her, and then he tries to get her out of the trap and goes to her home and enlists a whole group of her friends and relatives. And then in the course of the story, he gets into the trap, and the whole situation becomes reversed. And it's at the end of the book, it's a bit of a circus, everybody getting into everyone else's way and so forth and so on. It's just fun.
Yeah, it is fun. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. So, so let's talk about your long writing career. So, how did you get started in children's books?
Well, I was in high school when I made up my mind to be a writer. In my early writings, I was trying to be a playwright. I was raised in New York City, so I wanted to be a Broadway playwright, of course. And I embarked upon a failed career as a playwright, and went to college, eventually at the University of Wisconsin. Came back to New York and was not getting anywhere with the playwriting, really. And I had writer friends who were encouraging me to shift the focus of my writing. And as that happened, I had kids of my own, and I began to read to them. Books. And I had set, in particular, I made up a whole bunch of stories for my eldest son. I eventually wrote them down, and those stories became my first book, called Things That Sometimes Happen, which was published in 1970. And I enjoyed the experience of writing, and I basically said to myself, oh, this is what I want to do. And from then on, I continued writing for young people. And at first, I was writing, as it were, for my own kids, and so the books began to move up in level. And then I wrote a novel called No More Magic, and that really gave me pleasure. And I just continued that, and that's really what happened. So I've been really writing and publishing for more than 50 years. So
That is a wonderful, wonderful body of work you have.
it's a lot.
A lot. So, what's your favorite book that you've written?
Well, I have a lot of kids. It's like you were to ask me which of my kids is my favorite.
Oh,
I don't have one,
don't
but there
have
are
one.
certain things I like about them. This one does that, this one does this. So it's the same for the books. I don't have one favorite. I mean, there are 82 books. I couldn't pick one. But some of them I think are better than others, and some of them I enjoyed writing more than others. So, but I don't have a favorite. My standard answer, to be honest, is it's the book I'm working on. I want that to be the best. And it helps if you think it's going to be the best book. Now, as it happened, this week I started a new book. So is that my favorite? It's pretty bad at the moment, but we'll get there. So.
Where do you get your ideas for your books? I'm particularly thinking about Crispin because I just read it a couple months ago for the first time. It's the first book of yours that I've read, and I loved it. Not just for homeschoolers, historical fiction is just like a gold mine because if it's well written, you just learn so much. But I just even the research I imagine that you did to figure out these characters, I was wondering how you were inspired to write it or to look into this part of history, into these kinds of people.
Well,
what's the name of that book again, Sarah?
Crispin.
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 The Cross of Love. That's the Newbery book.
Yes, Crispin. Right.
Like there are a number of threads that create a book like that. First of all, from my teenage years, just because I loved it, I like to read history, and I still read history. And when I was in college, I majored in history. And I won't tell you that it's the politics of history that interests me. It's the stories in history, and I love them. Now, it so happened I was listening to a lecture about the Middle Ages, and I just thought, oh, this is really fascinating, and I need to write about this. So it's not very complicated, but one of the things about history, the more you read in history, the more history is accessible to you because everything ties together.
Mm-hmm.
And I read in particular American history and British history. Of course, they're connected. So anyway, my family jokes about how much irrelevant facts I know, just because I read a lot of history, and I'm more apt to share it when they don't want it than not, Did you know that? And so forth. Oh, there he goes again. And but that becomes part of the book. So I've just finished the book about the American Revolution, and it tries to tell the story in a very different kind of way. Every country has myths about their own history, and they embed certain ideals and beliefs. And the American history is no different, and the story of the American Revolution is no different. And while we think of it as a kind of unified attempt to seek independence from England, in fact, a very large, about a third of the population was opposed to the revolution. So this is a book about a family, and a boy in particular, who starts out not in favor of the revolution, and how that's handled and so forth, and the whole role of enslaved peoples during the American Revolution. When you learn in school about the American Revolution, about 20% of the population were Black and enslaved. And you hear almost nothing about their role in the American Revolution. And it's fairly complicated, but it's really fascinating, and so forth and so on. So I'm writing about all of that stuff, and that's a book that's coming out next year early on. And it just interests me. So I write about it. And I'm lucky enough that I can do that.
So when you've chosen an idea like that, okay, I'm going to set it in the American Revolution, do you come up first with your characters or with your plot?
Well, in that particular context, it was the plot, but very quickly it becomes the plot as told and experienced through one boy. To talk a little bit about that book, which is called Loyalty, by the way. In many ways, the American Revolution was a civil war. And there was a lot of violence from both sides. And so the story begins with a man who was killed because he's in favor of the monarchy. And he is killed by what we would call patriots, sons of liberty. Well, how does that work? And so forth. And it goes from there. Not a simple story.
Right. Must have been interesting to research.
Yeah. History is really interesting. But as I say, I mean, I've been reading history and American history for many, many years. So was able to do that.
Did you go to find some original sources like diaries and things?
Well, yeah, these days, I used to, before I could make a living as a writer, I was a librarian.
Ah,
I used to teach students how to do research. So research is not a very complicated thing for me. It's much easier than people think. So, I mean, for example, I just mentioned I'm starting a new book. So the first thing I do when I sort of commit myself to a book, the librarian in me begins to assemble a library. So I've already acquired, through one way or another, about 40, 50 books about the subject. Okay,
You
it's
wanna
just not that complicated.
okay, it's just not that complicated.
I would be really interested to read your American Revolution book, in part because you have a boy as a main character. We've had a hard time finding boy main character books because we're looking at books that have been recently published.
Correct.
So was that difficult for you at all to get a book that has a main character that's a boy going in the publishing industry, not for writing?
Absolutely not. It didn't even come up as a question.
Okay.
They'll probably just publish whatever you want to write, I think.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
I've
good.
written 3 books about the American Revolution. One is called The Fighting Ground, and also the protagonist is a boy. Then there's a book called Sophia's War. The protagonist is a girl.
Hmm.
And this one, Loyalty, the protagonist is a boy. So there you go.
Great. So, is, is there do you see any trend in your body of work? Like you tend to write middle grade, you tend to write for boys, you tend to, I don't know, whatever it might be.
I just finished the book. Some years ago, I wrote a book called The Secret School. The Secret School, which, by the way, is very popular in the homeschool world, is a story set in Colorado in the 1920s. And it's about a one-room schoolhouse. And the story is that the teacher in the one-room schoolhouse has to leave. And the kids don't want to shut the school down. So they elect one of their own fellow students, a 14-year-old girl named Ida, to become the teacher. And they try to keep this school going secretly. And it's a good story.
So it's a
And-
secret that it's a school, or it's a secret that there's no teacher?
Both.
Oh,
So the kids run this school themselves with this 14-year-old being the teacher. And
is that a true story?
probably, but I invented it. Anyway, the new book is, and one of the reasons that they keep the school open is that Ida, who's 14 years old, wants very much to go to high school. And in order to do that, she has to, as was the case in those days, she had to pass an exam. So that's why the school is kept open by these kids. So she can take her an exam.
Oh,
And this new book is how she goes to high school. So,
Cool.
and it's called, I don't know if they'll keep the title, but the title at the moment is Secret Sisters. And it's about her experience from a very rural environment. This is 1925.
Mhm.
She goes into a small town high school and so forth. So it was fun to write.
Mm.
yeah, great. So what does your family think of your writing? Are they supportive?
Oh, sure, they better. They don't have much choice, do they?
So you haven't had any major conflicts in your writing career for a long time?
You mean in terms of family?
Oh, I
Never.
don't know, just anything like publishing houses. I don't know, anything.
Publishing is a complex business. Um, I've had it pretty easy. I've always been able to publish pretty much what I want. And my working relationship with many editors has been, on the whole, positive. Sometimes they're disputes, but they're not really disputes. They're just discussions about how to go forward and so forth and so on. So that's never been a real problem for me.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks for especially, I didn't realize that this was the second sequentially in the series because my daughter finished the first one on her own and she loved it. And I was like, oh man, it's going to be such a long time before she can read this one, thinking that this was the most recently published, but I can just give this to her right now and she can read it since it's the second one. I like that because with the Narnia books, there's always controversy about whether you should read The Magician's Nephew last because it was written last. And it's my favorite one, so I gave it to my kids first. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Next time you're in the library, go read Ragweed first, and then you can get Ragweed and Poppy, which is a funny book. It's a funny book. Phyllis and I both really enjoyed it and laughed out loud while reading it, and your kids will too. So thank you. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.